Top Med Talk.
Hello and welcome back to Top Med Talk here at Anesthesiology 2023. It's the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists in San Francisco. Top Med Talk is here in the exhibit hall at the Moscone Center, and it has been a fabulous couple days. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm your host. I'm joined by my co-host and new co-editor-in-chief of Top Med Talk, Mike Grocott. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Desiree.
How's it going?
Forward to this one?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been awaiting this one. We've teased this conversation a couple times. Our guests today are going to be talking about the recent Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation conference on perioperative hemodynamic instability and the recent recommendations that they just launched earlier today. So we have our guest, Dr. Daniel Cole. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we were just reminiscing about the last time you had the headsets on. It's been a while.
It's been too long.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. I think it was back at the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. Yeah. So more patient safety stuff to talk about today, yeah?
A lot to talk about,
Yeah, all right. And Dr. Louise Sun. Louise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Dr. Mike Scott. Mike, he's a fan fave on Top Med Talk.
Always good to be here.
It is. Well, oh yeah.
I'm one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this is I am told that in your session only a few minutes ago, maybe an hour ago, that they had to close the doors.
Yes, it was standing room only, and they turned about 50 people away, so it was absolutely packed.
So we have the rock stars of the meeting here.
It is, right now.
Let's say that.
And as we've said earlier today.
Dan Cole is obviously, he's the
rock star.
Yeah, Freddie Mercury of the anesthesia world.
Well, we're saying we're hearing it here second, folks, so we didn't get first rights, but we're hearing it second. Just really quickly before we dive into what you guys talked about today, I'd like you just to take a second and tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from.
So, Dan Cole, I'm an anesthesiologist at UCLA. My specialty is neuroanesthesia, and my role at the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation is president.
Yeah, you've been running an amazing organization there. Thank you for all the work that you've done, Dan, because I know it's not, it's like a second job, I'm sure.
Yeah, second job.
Yeah. And Dr. Sun, how about you? Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm a professor and chief of cardiac anesthesiology at Stanford University. My role with the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation was as a panel member on the hemodynamic instability group.
Great. And Mike?
Hi, yes. So I'm professor and division chief at the University of Pennsylvania in critical care. I also am newly appointed chair of the Postoperative Deterioration Committee for APSF, along with John Tanner.
Great.
And we co-hosted with Dan the conference in Philadelphia about 9 months ago now.
Fantastic. We've had lots of great conversations, Mike, with you specifically about hemodynamic instability and intraoperative hypotension and all these different things. So I think this is going to be great to hear what you talked about. Mike, you actually participated in this as well, didn't you?
I was very fortunate, delighted to be invited. There was, I can't remember, there were not many out-of-towners there, or certainly out-of-country. You had a few international visitors.
Yeah, we did have a few. We were selective with who we had, but we had some of the key people like yourself, Mike, and Olivia, who've published a lot in Europe on hemodynamic instability, just to make sure that we weren't going down a rabbit hole and that this was applicable to all patients around globally, not just in the USA.
Yeah.
Great meeting.
Yeah. And I've heard that. I can't wait to hear kind of what you came up with. Two questions before we get to what you all were talking about. One, how the APSF chooses the topics and why kind of is this particular topic something that you chose this time around to do consensus guidelines around?
So this was a special conference.
Okay.
Every year in September, we hold something called the Stolting Conference, where we pick a patient safety priority and hold a consensus conference. But this was such a big topic, the important topic to the anesthesia practitioners throughout the country and the world, that we actually did this a little uniquely. It was by invitation only, which is a little bit different from a consulting conference. And so we had subject matter experts there, people from all kinds of different organizations, the government, payers, etc., and people from industry to approach this topic of hemodynamic instability and the outcome, the preventable harm that occurs due to hemodynamic instability.
Yeah. And this really is a patient safety issue, right? Do you think patients understand that?
I think probably patients need to learn a little bit more about risk to them from hemodynamic stability that occurs way too often.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, if you will, and then Louise, I'll pass it on to you. Talk a little bit about the process for this particular one and how things went, what your broad topics were, and then how you decided on where to go with it. You can take that.
I can take that one. Yeah. So we had a group of experts that did the literature searches who presented to the audience.
Okay.
And then we had a modified Delphi scoring. We had live voting, and we used the disagree, agree, strongly agree method. And this is just to hone the focus of our discussions. Agree means that we're on the right track with this question. Strongly agree, and it might need a bit more work. Strongly agree means this is done, take it off the table. And disagree literally means I don't think this is relevant, or I disagree with this concept and it needs further work. So that's how we sort of channeled it live. And then we went into discussion groups, came back, did further basically Delphis using that system to build the landscape, really, because everyone asks, is this a clinical practice paper? It's not a clinical practice paper. This is about how to take a global approach to fixing hemodynamic instability. And the reason is that every day this occurs to us all, doesn't it, in clinical practice? Yeah. And so this isn't a blame thing that we just got to fix hemodynamic instability. This is how do we fix the system, make it a better safety for the patients and better outcomes. But how do we drive the change at a system level? How do we drive the change at a global level and a bedside level? So there were lots and lots of different stakeholders involved, from nurses to, Dan was saying, the anesthesia partners as well as academic partners. Yeah. The VA. Payers. And then we invited industry because we need to guide industry to direct them to give us the tools that we need. Because if you really think of it, even just the two simple things of fixing hemodynamics now, which is a fluid bolus and peripheral norepinephrine, is not really available to us as providers. You can't give a rapid enough fluid bolus off a pump at 999 mils an hour. Yeah. And I was at the Society of Minnesota meeting doing a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I did a live poll, and only about 20% of people had availability of peripheral norepinephrine in the OR. They have phenylephrine, but they don't have norepinephrine to support SA3/4. So this is a big problem. We haven't even got the basic tools to fix the problem in the OR. Yeah. So this is how we wanted to have this paper as a structured paper that will benefit everyone and lead to common purpose fix. Because if you think peripheral norepinephrine, you've got to get your
there's a lot of people involved to get that going.
Exactly. So this is it's a small problem, but it needs a big fix.
Yeah. Louise, how was your experience there being on the panel and part of this? And what did you feel like were some of the biggest points of conversation and maybe disagreement or, things that you thought were big conversations?
Yeah, so it was a great experience. Like my colleagues have stated already, we had stakeholders from all areas. I participated as one of the people who generated some of the evidence in the area. Okay. Our group had attempted to define critical thresholds and durations of hypotension in association with a number of organ injuries in non-cardiac and cardiac surgery. And, I certainly met a number of clinician scientists who generated evidence in the similar area, as well as on wearables and, AI machine learning algorithms, as well as stakeholders in the industry who were really much involved in the space. So I think it was great. And what's even more great about the consensus conference was the lack of consensus, which generated a lot of, very good, heated conversations that we carried over even after the event. So, we divided up into a number of writing groups afterwards, up to, I think, about 5 or 6 people per writing group. And even during the writing process, there was a couple of debate. Yeah. And something as simple as how do you even define hypotension took us quite a while to nail down.
Yeah, that's fair. I would have assumed that, just being in multiple conversations about this with large groups. It is hard to kind of come to consensus. And, I think you mentioned hypotension was what started this conversation. And I think those of us who talk a lot about it has really morphed into maybe the hemodynamic instability more than just intraoperative hypotension. You also explored more of perioperative hemodynamic instability, not necessarily just intraop, is that correct?
Correct, yes. We did both in the OR and the post-op phases of PACU, immediate 24 hours, and then going discharged to the floor. We didn't have the capacity to talk about home discharge, so we've kept it to the perioperative in-hospital period.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, again, like I said, I'm sure there was a lot of debate. So was it difficult kind of coming up with what guidelines, how many guidelines, what are we looking at here for what you guys ended up landing on?
Yes, so we came up with 17 high-level recommendations, and they were bunched into current knowledge, preventing hemodynamic instability-related harm across the whole of the perioperative period from OR to PACU to the floor. And then we had a lot of people from MPOG and data collection experts, and as well as NS-Quick was represented, because data to drive the quality change, both to map the problem and then to fix the problem and know we're fixing it is key. And then we had some other approaches. One was about whether we should inform patients, because the rest of the world is starting to inform patients about perioperative complications and their long-term downstream effects. And then finally, we came to the importance of technology, of which there was a huge amount, which we can talk about shortly, and advancing the science around the technology and the data. And the last thing we really ended on, which I think is the most exciting, is launching a national campaign. And this seems to have stirred up a lot of interest.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to how we can construct that with the relevant stakeholders.
Yeah. Dan, your experience participating in this, were you surprised by whenever you started talking about these statements and coming up with this about the debate, or was that something that you kind of knew that was going to happen?
I encourage debate because it's not a black and white issue. There aren't black and white answers. There's some gaps in science. And so good, healthy debate leads us to a better outcome. And to kind of paraphrase a saying that I've heard before, we strive for excellence, and along the way we might bump into improvement.
That's right.
And so we just wanted to improve. That was the expectation, not to have something that is going to be enduring for the next 100 years, but let's move the ball forward on this and not just make a whole bunch of assumptions about how these patients should be taken care of.
Yeah, because I'm looking here at the recommendations, and I can see where a lot of these would be tough to land on something. Can we talk about a little bit about what you came up with and some of the statements regarding the different topics? Who wants to start?
Well, the hypotension-related harm across all the phases of care is key, and we know about the OR bit already. But we identified that there's a particular time of harm, which is after induction of anesthesia and before the surgery gets going. And then post-operatively, there's definitely seems to be a gap in how we actually monitor perfusion and blood pressure, because we go from this either continuous blood pressure or every 2 to 3 minutes to suddenly going to every 4 to 6 hours, and it misses a lot of the hypotension events. So there's a gap in what we do in clinical practice there, but there's also a gap in actually the monitors that we can use, because ideally we'd have non-invasive continuous blood pressure monitoring. That would be the holy grail really for every single patient.
Yeah.
And then it brought up, Ashish Khanna did a fantastic presentation on transitioning to wearables. In Wake Forest, they've got huge experience where they use wearables on all their patients, collecting heart rate, and respiratory rate, temperature, and all those things. And I think they have portable blood pressure as well. And that made us really realize that in other centers where we're working, we're probably a bit behind, aren't we, on what we really could be doing. When you look at your Apple Watch now and everything, all other watches are available.
Other watches are available, yes.
So it makes us realize that we've got to embrace technology, and I think COVID has accelerated that. But the question is what is the right technology at the right time? And also, what is the triage point where we know that that patient is safe to then pass down the perioperative pathway?
Yeah. And Louise, what are some of the recommendations? I know you said you helped develop some of the statements. Were a couple of those that you worked on?
Right. So I'll probably speak specifically to the definition of hypotension.
Yeah, I think that's great.
So, I mean, in a broader sense, the statement is about hemodynamic instability. It's a pretty complicated concept that actually involves a number of vital signs all interacting together. But blood pressure seems to be the most commonly used surrogate for describing instability. Mm-hmm. And blood pressure itself is actually a complex interaction of many things like cardiac output, stroke volume, systemic vascular resistance, viscosity of the blood, and the elastance of the vasculature. So I think, there's been many studies that have been produced to date, with respect to AKI or acute kidney injury. The consensus is that MAP less than 55 is definitely too low.
Yeah.
MAP less than 60 is likely associated with serious harm, whereas MAP less than 65 is perhaps unacceptable as well, relative to end organ injury. And with respect to MINS or myocardial injury after non-cardiac surgery, the evidence is fairly similar with respect to blood pressure targets. Now there's been the POISE-3 trial that came out recently that sort of muddied the water a little bit for us, in that, they compared basically two strategies, right? In one of the factorial designs, they looked at hypertension avoidance and hypotension avoidance. So basically, when it boils down to is MAP of 60 versus MAP of 80 as the target. So they actually didn't find any differences in their primary or secondary endpoints, which included, major vascular complications, MINS, and, mortality, and a number of other things. So that's why one of our conclusions was that MAP greater than 80, doesn't seem to give us any benefits. Mm-hmm. But we do recommend keeping MAP above 65.
So you decided on a number and not a range?
Not a range.
I think we recognise that 65 or less is where the signal starts, although that we know in the future we've got to individualise this. There might be some patients that are good with 60. Right. There might be others do need 70. And there's a lot of discussion on how you set that, whether is it a nocturnal mean variable that we're going to use? Is it something we use the outpatient variable for, mm-hmm. rather than the inpatient variable? Mm-hmm. But I think the work for there to validate that's still yet to be done.
Yeah. What were some of the other high-level statements, or some of the bold statements that you came up with, Dan?
Well, I think to layer on to what they said, and then I'll get on to a different one, is that really blood pressure is only a surrogate of what we really care about, which is end organ perfusion and oxygenation. We don't monitor that.
No.
And we do know also that if you're going to use blood pressure as the surrogate, there is a lot of, as Mike said, a lot of interpatient variability on what that number should be. And so we came up with a floor of 65, but then that's to be modified upward as you start to get into other comorbidities such as coronary artery disease, cerebral vascular disease. And how you modify that upward is unknown. We need some more data on that. The other statement I think that comes up is, what is the proper intervention?
Yeah.
Right now, when the blood pressure falls below a threshold that we're comfortable with, a lot of times the assumption is that is due to vasodilatation, and we give a vasoconstrictor. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered the clinical scenario where a patient has a high systemic vascular resistance, a low cardiac output, a low stroke volume, and making the assumption that phenylephrine or norepinephrine is a drug of choice would have probably caused harm to that patient. And so we do, as layering on to what Mike and Louise said, We need to have better monitoring so we have better information to make fewer assumptions and more data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Mike, which group were you in, and were you part of that conversation?
No, very much part of the conversation. I mean, I recall all the debate in the room at the time about the various issues. What I'm interested in now, having not seen you guys for a little while, the national campaign, what's that going to look like? I mean, it sounds like it's kicked off very effectively, but what's the shape of that?
Well, I think what I also want to follow up, and Dan and I want to clarify, is fixing the blood pressure isn't the fix for hemodynamic instability. You've got to fix the underlying cause. And what that really means is you've got to optimize cardiac filling and cardiac index first. Not just
flow,
but you've got to get flow first before you press, because if not, you're going to cause a lot of harm. In reality, it might be that you do start a little bit of pressure and then you start measuring the flow. But the answer is pressors are not the answer to everything. And the other thing is we've gone through this, for me, a dark period, being one of the leaders of ERAS, as you are, Mike, where the surgeons have construed IV fluid restriction as IV intraoperative fluid restriction, which we've never ever said it's post-operative IV fluid restriction.
Yeah.
And in the OR, it's the right amount of fluid at the right time and individualized. So we are worried that if everyone restricts fluid and then starts giving even more vasopressors to fix the blood pressure, we could see even more harm. So it's very important how we educate. And education is one of the key messages that we've had in two of the recommendations. We've got to go back to medical school, got to go back to all our providers, both in the OR but also post-op with the APPs, and we've got to have more flow monitoring.
Yeah,
that's really what we need. We need the tech companies to come in and give us really easy, non-invasive flow monitoring. And the other thing is we need to keep this message that echocardiography, bedside echocardiography, it gives you immediate situational awareness together with flow monitoring of both centrally what's happening to the heart and then what's happening in the peripheral circulation. So it's a multi-pronged.
It's what you just said, Mike. It's the second time today we've kind of covered the challenges of ERAS. And actually the language in the beginning was not about fluid restriction. It was about avoidance of fluid overload.
Yeah. I said we interviewed Henrik Collette here 5 years ago who said that. He said, I never intended for it to be restriction. I said avoid fluid overload. Guys, I'm going to pause this for just 1 second. Dan, what was your big takeaway from the meeting for you? What did you find was one of the biggest revelations and that you were really excited about the most?
Well, so the exciting part, I think, is the national campaign.
Yeah.
And spreading this news, educating, et cetera. And it starts with things like this that get done. It starts with a panel that we just had today that had around, 250 people, and several others that got turned away. It starts with our white paper that is going to be published any day detailing these recommendations, and then starting to engage some of the other stakeholders, including patient groups that should be most concerned about this. And again, starting that national campaign and, getting traction with not only the issue, but some of the solutions that need to be achieved in the future.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dan, I'm going to let you, if you want to go ahead and head out, because I know, again, it's a very important meeting. We'll cut his mic off and let you go. But thank you so much for joining us. It was great to chat. Yeah. And we'll continue. I bring people in and out. We trade out all the time. So we talked about that national campaign. I think that having panels like this are great. You are going to be publishing these statements, or it has been. Where is that right now?
Accepted in Anesthesia and Analgesics.
Great.
The special article. It was actually September the 28th. It was accepted, so it should be out literally any day. It's on free download.
Great.
Yeah.
And you said it's not necessary to. I mean, it's to guide clinical practice, but not necessarily. This is a little bit higher level.
It's a higher level. I've only recently come into APSF, and what's I've been impressed with Dan Cole as president, but if you look at all the past presidents as well, is how engaging this society is and how effective it is at change management. It's really is going back to the days like with Mike Ramsey and things like that. So that's been very powerful because they've got all these existing relationships like the American College of Surgeons and all the perioperative nursing groups. And this is the key, is we've got to get everyone in on this.
Yeah.
We've got to educate people of what the problem is, the fact it's better to predict rather than be reactive, avoid the downstream harm. And then if we also then get everyone on board, then we will change the quality, but also we can start mapping the science a bit more.
Yeah.
If we can collect them. And obviously we're in a new age of live waveforms, AI, analytics. So we're hoping that might really lead to a brighter future. Because one of the things why Dan and I did the conference is we've been talking about this a long time now, haven't we? And yet we've had all these big papers that come out which shown we've just still got the same incidence of hypotension. Rick Dunn just published in general anesthesia practice at 29%,
Rick and
29% with your group. 29%, intraoperative hypotension, with the definition being longer than 15 minutes of less than 65. That's total. That isn't always consecutive minutes. But so we're suddenly realizing that we're not doing a great job as team anesthesia, and it's not because none of us want to do that. It's because it's a difficult topic.
Yeah.
And then you've got these different physiological situations. There's no doubt that a lot more hypotension happens under ventilation.
Yes.
So we've got all these stressed volume, you've got left-right ventricular uncoupling, intrathoracic pressures, all these things that really haven't been worked through properly yet. But I think we've now at the stage we probably could, because we can collect the continuous data on patients. And then you've got going into the post-op, where often it's just a question that people are just getting fluid shifts and we're not just keeping the tank full enough.
Yeah.
We found certainly in the UK that if you just keep the tank full in the post-operative period with low-dose vasopressors, you could fix it very nicely.
Yeah. Louise, it's not necessarily to guide everyday clinical practice, but I'm sure there's the big takeaways for us who are clinicians who are in the OR every day trying to figure out, and you said you were trying to really define all of these things. What would you say is the biggest takeaway for, me going back to the OR tomorrow to use this information?
To me, the biggest takeaway is really pressure is not equal to flow. And I think, I think, Mike and Dan have reiterated this several times as well during our talk. So, what I have to say is that there are many factors that dictate flow. Pressure is one of them. But we need to look at individual patients as individualized units. There's ventricular coupling, but there's also things like if a patient has severe restrictive diastolic dysfunction, or if the patient has RV failure, at high risk of having RV failure, then their loading conditions will be vastly different than, a regular patient with normal heart function. And so I think, extra monitoring equipment is useful for different patients. Invasive or non-invasive assessments of flow as well as cardiac function are important considerations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just that, we've all heard hypotension is bad. That's what we've been hearing. But now starting to realize that instead I'm just reaching for the neosynephrine, which is what all of us have, or if you have low-dose norepi, but not many of us do, reaching for that and just automatically giving it, thinking about, well, what is the condition? I need to get more information. Maybe I don't have all the technology, but maybe I have some rudimentary things. I can start thinking outside the box and a little bit beyond where we have just traditionally, robotically reached for something to give that. So I think just that particular awareness, I think, is going to be really important going forward.
For sure. And I do have to say that, there are really simple and rudimentary measures of perfusion, such as arterial blood gas, looking at the base deficit. On the gas, lactate will be a later measure of hypoperfusion. And there are also, some clinical assessments that we could do to look at volume status as well, aside from the advanced monitoring.
Wonderful work, you guys. Thank you so much for doing this and pulling this together. I think it's going to be really impactful at many different levels to move this conversation and hopefully, start really getting some traction to see if we can, change practice. So congratulations to you all. Anything we can do at Top Med Talk to help continue to promote it, of course, we will. Anything to look forward to in the future? You think there's going to be the second iteration of this maybe in a year or so?
Well, I think this is just the first step of the road, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a little bit like surviving sepsis. We'll get fixing hemodynamic instability 1, and then we'll be able to modify it as people adjust their practice. Just like in Surviving Sepsis 1, we just threw lots and lots of fluid at people to increase the cardiac index, didn't we? And then we realised that wasn't good, and we then started dobutamine, and then we realised we were getting more mins, so we stopped that, and then we went to norepinephrine. So no doubt we're going to see many reiterations.
Hopefully we got it right the first time.
I hope so. We got a little closer at least. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining us on Top Med Talk. It's always such a pleasure. And Louise, it was wonderful to meet you. I'm so glad that you could carve out some time to chat with us. So thank you so much. And thank you for listening to Top Med Talk. You know, you can find us at topmedtalk.com. All of these great conversations from the ASA anesthesiology meetings from the last 5 or 6 years are there. All of our wonderful conversations we've had about intraoperative hypotension and hemodynamics, if you want to learn more that really, I think, has formed or helped contribute to this conversation, are on there. So check that out. We are on X, formerly known as Twitter. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook. Check us out. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube if you watch any of our videos. We always appreciate that. Again, thank you to the ASA, the American Society of Anesthesiologists, for this beautiful booth, the space in your exhibit hall. We could not do that without you, as well as our sponsors, Medtronic, GE Healthcare, and one of our founding supporters, Edwards Life Sciences. Thanks so much, everybody. Cheers.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.